Good evening, everyone. It's 7:01 on Thursday, November 10th. This is the Finance, Personnel, and Operations Committee meeting. We will be talking about our capital improvement plan again this evening, getting an update on ESSERF funding, and talking about some staffing pieces. And I'll hand it over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you. Are we live?
Yes.
Yes, and recording. Okay, great. So good evening, everyone. Let's do a quick round of introductions. I'm not sure that everybody knows everybody on this call, so let's start. How about if I just do it from here? Tamara, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Tamara Sweeney, Assistant Director of Facilities with Portland Public Schools.
Great. Steve
Stolfen, Facilities Director, Portland Public Schools. Hello, Miranda. It's been a while. From behind the scenes, you're finally reappearing.
I guess I'll go.
Good to see you.
You as well, Steve, and everybody else. I'm Miranda Fasullo, Budget Director.
Great. And Kate?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Hersom, just joining as the new grant manager.
Awesome. And so everybody met Adam Burke, who is our chair of the Finance Committee. And Emily, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Emily Figdor. I'm the District 2 representative and the current school board chair. And Steve, I have this same exact reaction to seeing Miranda. So yay. So happy to see you and have you. And welcome to Kate.
Yeah.
And last but not last, Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. This is Ben Grant. I am an at-large member. And just so you know, I'm not sitting at a desk, so I may just turn the video off and chime in when needed, but I will be listening.
Great. And Sarah, introduce yourself, and then I'm going to have a couple people reintroduce themselves so that you know who's here and what they do. Just real quick.
Sure, and my apologies for being late. I'm Sarah Bryden, District 5 School Board Rep.
Great.
Hi, everybody.
I think you've met Tamara at our last meeting, but I don't know that you know Kate or Miranda. So why don't you reintroduce yourself?
Hi, Sarah. I'm Kate Hersom, from just joining the team as the new ESSERF grant manager.
Kate.
And Miranda.
Hi, I'm Miranda Fasullo, Budget Director. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Miranda. Nice to meet you.
And I don't know, Nylet, do you know Tamara? Have you met Tamara before? I don't remember if you were at our last Finance Committee meeting or not. That would be the only opportunity.
No, I wasn't at the last.
Yeah. So Tamara, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, Tamara Sweeney, Assistant Director of Facilities with the Portland Public Schools.
Okay, we're not going to do additional introductions. I'm sorry. I totally, we should have waited and gotten everybody here before we did introductions. Just when you're speaking, introduce yourself, reintroduce yourself so that Mr. Youssef will know. Youssef is one of our at-large board members. Nylet Billiou is another one of our at-large board members. We have a couple of new staff, and so I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew everybody, but since people were coming in like little dominoes, it was I totally flubbed it. So my apologies to everyone for that. So the agenda today, as you heard, is we're going to update on our CIP. We're going to ask you to approve it so that we can bring it to the full board at Tuesday's meeting. And then we are finally ready to do an ESSERF update. Yay, Miranda and Kate, for your hard work. And then we need to talk a little bit about next steps once you have the full picture of that. So it's a pretty important agenda. Hopefully we'll go fairly smoothly. So does that make sense to everyone? And then, as you know, we also have a couple of updates on finance, staffing, and the superintendent search. That's what's on the agenda for today. So we're going to jump into CIP. So we had some follow-up from our October meeting. Let me see what I'm doing here. So what is new in here is the updated FY24 6-year CIP. That was something that came out of the meeting that we needed to do. So that's updated in here. And we're going to be talking about it in the next item. So I don't think that we need to dwell on it at this time, because we're going to be jumping into the staff recommendations. So, and when we do the staff recommendations, we'll also talk about the updated CIP. So, Tamara, do you want to share your screen and start with the staff recommendation?
Sure. Do you want me to start with the 6-year, the narrative?
No, I think start with the one that's labeled FY24 staff recommendations, okay. Just so that we have like the sort of the bottom line what we're asking for.
FY24.
And that I'm looking at this, and this may not be updated.
Let me see if I can.
Javier, I don't think we have that document.
Is it this one? Is this what we're speaking of?
Yeah, you can use that. I think that actually will do the job, because the one that is called FY24 staff recommendations, finance and ops, November 10th. That one is not updated. So this is the recommendation. 2 items. One is what we discussed at the last meeting, the Portland High roof replacement. So that is for a total of 1.8 million. And then the other item is replacing 3 of our buses using CIP at a cost of 414. So the total cost of this is 2.2 million 14,000. So I don't know. I guess I'm going to just pause and see if any questions about this.
For old time's sake, Javier, I'll ask if we're going to begin transitioning to electric buses.
And the answer to that is yes. We are on the waiting list for the state. We did submit an application, and we are on the waiting list for that. I found out, so I thought that you might ask that, and that's actually very good news.
Thanks for that bit of good news.
Yeah.
I see one hand.
Questions?
Chair Figdor, your hand's up.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I don't remember the details of the roof replacement at Portland High, but the staff assessment is this is the most urgent project that we need to move forward.
Yes. Can you go to the one that's called scoring, please?
Yes. Absolutely. Let me see. Is that in the board docs? Is that what you called it, scoring? Sorry about that.
You know what? I'm sorry.
I did not have that.
Not in board docs, so let me just share my screen.
I can be.
Can you guys see my screen now? You can?
So there was another one for FY24 that I put together just for the roof. I have to find.
Are you guys seeing my screen right now?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So
Yeah,
this
sorry,
is,
I was nodding and I realized probably you needed the audio. Yes.
and I like your like little tiny things over on the side. So
Yep.
sorry about that. So this is something that I think Board Member Bryden, you had asked for a better understanding of what the projects were. And so this is the scoring of the documents. This is what we've traditionally done to bring this to the board so that you would understand, how these projects that are in the queue are, sort of rank in terms of their importance. So here you have everything that was in the on the list for FY24, and that includes the Portland roof. And I'm going to let Steve and Tamara walk through and explain the scoring. And, obviously we've moved a number of these items over into FY25. So why don't you guys walk through these?
Do you want us to speak to all of them at this point? Is that what you're asking? Okay.
Because I don't think that everybody understands, including myself, because we do this once a year. I don't remember what the scoring actually means, so it would be
sure. So the assessment was done in 2017. So when it says FA year, for example, the roof, they're looking for it to be done years 1 through 5 after the assessment was done. So which would mean 2018 to 2022. The condition level 2 to 3 was like a fair. I think that meant like fair. And life cycle was end of service life is what the ESL stands for. And the action priority, I had that on the other. Steve, do you know what the action priority denotion is?
I don't recall it. No.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly.
The roof condition is the EPDM surface of the roof is gone.
Right.
It's gone. It's totally de-seaming, delaminating, uninsulated, as it's indicated here. So in the table from the assessment from Sebago Technics, the windows are in a better condition and life cycle and position than the roof. The roof should have been replaced 10 years ago. We should have replaced it at end of life back in 18.
Mm-hmm.
And the windows would have been prioritized out of the assessment and options as we've done during the pandemic, following the roof. Pandemic pushed the windows in front of the roof. But I'll find out what I think a long-term, short-term, medium-term priority.
I think I have it somewhere. I just have to. Any other questions on the assessment of the roof or how the scores work?
I don't see anybody coming forward.
Okay.
Okay.
I can add on the roof as well. Allied Engineering is in a position to bring this to bid documents for the city by the end of November, first week of December, for the structural components of this, get it on the street. And then after the structural repair, that's $250,000 of SRRF loan. This CIP, this 1.8, will be to actually do the flashing, the precast around the soffits of the roof and put a new EPDM surface insulated up to code roofing surface on the whole school. So
Thanks, Mr. Stilfen.
Back
Hello,
out.
Bryden.
I am assuming or guessing, or can you confirm? I'm assuming this is not the whole list from Sebago Technics and their work 5 years ago. So my question is, once the items that we're looking at that have an FA year value of 1 to 5, once we get these that we can see here, once we get those done, does that mean that everything from the Sebago Technics project that had an FA year of 1 through 5 will be done? Does that make sense?
Yes,
No,
and the answer is categorically no.
No, there's a lot of work. Yeah.
I mean, just to put this in context, the Sebago Technics report identified 300 million over
Got it. Okay.
15, I'm sorry, over 20 years. So, no, not even close.
Okay. So the things that are getting done are the most urgent of the urgent within each FA year.
That's what we feel is the most urgent at this point.
Super.
Yes.
Not super, but it makes sense. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And let me just add a little bit, because I think it's important context. There's a couple of things. Some of these projects are getting done because there's an opportunity to get them done before other projects that might be ranked as a higher priority. So, some of the HVAC projects that you see here are in our the state revolving renovation fund, because HVAC is prioritized, and therefore, we are able to get funding for them. So some of these things, it's also opportunity. The department, the facilities department, also has a annual budget, and they are picking off some of the smaller things, even if they might be like in the 10-year, because there are things that are within their capacity to do, and they might be doing something else that's related, in another building, and they're prioritizing getting all of those done at the same time. And then there's things in our CIP request that aren't on the list, that are things that are new. So, for example, we've had multiple years of adding in security cameras and functions and keyless door entry and things along those lines. They're not prioritized. They're not even, visible in the Sebago Technics report, but they're still necessary. They're new. They're things that we need to have in place. So the CIP isn't just off of the Sebago Technics report, but every one of these types of projects that are in the Sebago Technics report, we're able to score using this. So for access controls, your 4 of 5 piece in here doesn't have a scoring because it wasn't a part of the Sebago.
Because that was a snapshot in time 5 years ago.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was really helpful.
Okay. Tamara, do you want to switch then to the 6-year update so that people can see what it looks like in the out years? And I'll stop sharing.
Let's see. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we updated the 6-year plan to show the 414,000 for the 3 school buses, the 1.8 for the roof replacement, and then Is there anything, did you want to go over 2025 and 2026?
Yeah, just talk about the things that
give an idea.
The things that we moved out of 2024 and where they went.
So the door access controls, we moved from 2024 to 2025, the third phase. We moved Lyman Moore Middle School, reworking the corridors and lockers to 25. Installing a freight elevator, providing secure entrance to the vestibule at Moore Middle School, paths, replacing the emergency generator and emergency exit lights. I think that's about as far. The rest of that was pretty well. No, actually, it goes down. Address ponding along Island Avenue and Peaks. King Middle School, glass block with storefront. I don't know if you want me to run through all this. It's probably not necessary, I'm guessing.
Just probably bring us to the bottom line for next year.
Sure, absolutely. So the bottom line numbers at this point, the way it looks is FY25 at 5.8 mil, 2026 at 5.5, and then across for grand total of what we would, what we would like if we could get everything done of 38 million at the very bottom line for all the years combined for the 6th year. We know it's typical 2 million. Is that typical CIP, what we can get? So things will have to get moved around as priorities are come apparent.
And also, I think it's important for people to know that many of those costs that are in there are not, in sort of in the out years in particular where they haven't been revisited, will, once we get there, will need to be adjusted for, inflationary increases. And so, it might be that, the parking deck renovation, Steve, when was that costed out? Like a couple of years ago?
4 years ago.
Yeah. So if we do that in 2028, you can bet that it's going to cost more than $700,000.
Yeah. And the money we have, so to speak, in play right now on CIP, as you see, is the boilers at the past Casco Bay High School. The boilers are being replaced as currently right now. And we're awaiting delivery of the final components to the boilers here in the next few weeks. So we are obtaining some CIP projects on an annual basis and completing. So those boilers at pass were 55 years old and sorely needed to be replaced.
Looks like Emily has her hand up.
I'm wondering, once we hit 2026 and we and the city finish paying the pension obligation bond, if we are anticipating more ability to bond, and so perhaps have more leeway with the CIP.
I don't know, obviously don't know the answer to that. But, the city will have additional capacity to bond at that time. I do want to remind, you, because you're familiar with it, and let others know that as we've done our overall budget projections, we've looked at, being able to capture that decrease in our portion of debt service. We've looked at using that to keep our debt fairly consistent, given that that's when the full cost of the 4 school bond renovations kick in. And so the fact that in 2026, the pension obligation bond is done, it just lets us continue on an even trajectory with our debt, rather than have it, sort of balloon at that point. So, and in the interim years, we're using the debt service reserve that the board built back in 2021 to mitigate those increases coming from the 4 school renovations.
I do think, yes, and I that's helpful context. I do think there still is a down, if I remember correctly, is a downward trajectory in our debt service after 2026, even incorporating the full extent of the full cost of the 4 school bond. But in any case, just raising the question of whether the city will have a different perspective when it comes to the CIP once the pension obligation bond is paid off. And I know we don't know the answer to that. Just raising it as a possible issue for us in the future, possible opportunity for us in the future.
Member Bryden has a question or their hand up.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to make sure I understand the bottom line, 2025, 5.8 million, that then will become a line item in the overall budget, correct?
No, it's a great question. The CIP is a separate line. It is in the city's overall budget.
Okay.
And then the debt that we incur from the borrowing associated with that, the 2.2 million that we are hopefully going to be approved to borrow will then appear as debt service in subsequent years' budgets. So to the conversation we were just having, about the pension obligation bond, that's a bond that the city entered into many years ago, 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago, that has been, in our debt for all those years and will disappear in 2026, leaving, sort of a decrease. But there's other debt that is coming on at the same time, and that's what the 4 school bond, for example, is additional debt. So will this $2 million will be additional debt, but that's where it shows up in our budget. It doesn't show up as $2.2 million in our budget. It shows up as $2.2 million borrowed and the debt associated with that in the city's budget.
Okay, thank you.
See no other hands.
Okay, so just to sort of summarize what we're into the city manager for inclusion in the city's CIP request is the 2.2 million. That is for the roof and the 4 school buses. We have been working with the transportation department on an approach to address, we have significantly more than 4 buses that need to be renewed, but we're doing it differently, and we'll see that when we get to the budget discussion later in the spring. But so that's what we're asking for in CIP. The process is for you to approve that today, then we can bring it to the school board on Tuesday for their consideration, or for your consideration along with your colleagues. So we'd love for you to take action on it unless you have additional questions.
So moved.
there a second? Member Bridle, a second. So, can members of the committee come off or come on to video?
Can you
Possible.
stop sharing for a second, Tamara, so everybody can see?
While that's happening, Superintendent, can you state the motion again, what we're voting on?
Yeah, we're asking you to approve the $2.214 million request to the city for the capital for the FY24 capital improvement plan. And that is your approval to bring it to the full school board. It'll be a first read at next Tuesday's meeting.
Okay. So, all in favor, please indicate either with your hand or voice if you can't be on screen. All in favor of the motion? Okay. And any opposed? Member Grant, was that an opposed or a late in favor?
That was just a late in favor. I didn't hit the button in time. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So the motion moves forward with unanimous approval. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, and we're going to move then to our status update on where we are with ESSERF. And I'm going to turn it over to Miranda and Kate. So,
Javier, can I just say thank you to the operations staff and facility staff, excuse me, for that context. It's really helpful to see the longer term plan and to help understand the trajectory for all the work we need to do. So just want to acknowledge that work and say thank you.
I froze for a second, so I didn't hear it, but I hope everybody else did.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody. Do you need facilities here for the rest of this meeting, Javier? As much as I'd like to see Miranda's presentation, I'll catch up with her beginning of next week. And Catherine.
Watch the video. You can watch the video. So.
Yeah, I can watch the video. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Bye, Mr. Stephen.
Bye. I'll see you soon, you guys.
Bye, Steve.
Bye, Tamara.
Bye, Tamara.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen, but Kate's actually going to start us off with ESSERF 2. So let me know if you guys can see my screen, and is that a good size?
Works for me.
All right.
Yep.
Works for me. Okay. So as you can see, the Portland School Department was awarded almost $8 million with the ESSERF 2 money. The project categories are to the left. And then as you move across the table, you can see that what's been spent in the expended category and what we project to be spent, and then what's remaining. The curriculum projects and the ESOL, PD licenses, et cetera, you can see in the first two rows are spent down. When you look at the equity special ed, that the 64,542, what's remaining there is from the ESY services. The director there has decided to cover that cost with a different grant. Diversity and hiring support.
Can you pause for a second, Kate, and just make sure that people have an opportunity to ask questions along the way. And then just, because we know this stuff, but I don't know that everybody does. ESY is extended school year. So that's basically summer school for our special education students, but it's called ESY.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions yet? Okay, I'll keep going. The diversity hiring and support, that is for a part-time recruiter, given the number of positions that will need to be hired through ESSERF 3. That position I don't believe is hired yet, but I know the HR director has that on her radar. For the communications project, that is the website, the beautiful website that's just been under construction here. The remainder of that that fund is going to be just switched into ESSERF 3. The technology project was a heavy lift for Gavin, I believe, with the core network and the firewall upgrades, but that 12,575 is what is truly remaining from that project. For the summer project, again, that number is actual what's remaining. Surprising given the number of projects that they had with partnerships over the summer, but that is what's remaining. The custodian and grant management projects are spent down or projected to be spent down. In the spring reopening, there is an overspend there, and that was basically for supplies, for picnic tables, chairs, and refrigerators for the schools. The staff will be spent down or projected to be spent down. Food service, I'm a little sad that Steve just left because I've been talking with Steve and Dawn about kind of getting the generator project kind of back in kind of their radar so that they can continue to talk about that, because there is a considerable amount of money, in the projected column for that to be completed. And then operations, that was basically for additional contracted cleaning services. Can I answer any questions?
So in sum, we had almost 8 million. We have about 355,000 that we expect will not be spent in these categories, and so that remains to be allocated this coming year through next year.
Well, I would say that this is a little bit difficult to kind of pin that number as final, because like I said, the kitchen project is still kind of in conversation, and there are a couple of projects that like in the curriculum project, there was a science software that was purchased, but they need about another $10,000 worth of licenses or equipment for that project. So this is a little bit of a kind of an estimate of what's remaining, but it's pretty close.
Okay, I see Member Bryden's hand up.
My apologies. I did have to step away for just a moment, so I apologize if you already covered this, but so I'm seeing ESSERF 2 and ESSERF 3. Was there an ESSERF 1?
Yes. Okay,
and so that's part of the landscape or the universe of what we're talking about, but it's just not in these documents.
It's all spent and finished.
Yeah. Okay. So right, in terms of what's left, that's not relevant. I'd be really curious to see what we did spend it on, though.
Custodians.
At some point. Excuse me?
Custodians.
All of it? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, well, there, that answers that. Thank you.
I can just...
Do you want to explain? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and explain that?
Did you say for me to explain it? I cut out for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So back before all of these other grants were ever known to us to be coming, back in, the glory days of May 2020 or so, is when we got ESSERF 1, and it was like $2 million, and it was used to kind of offset custodial costs and bring our budget down to a 0% tax increase. And then when we got more funds later on, and when we got a kind of a large amount of state funding, either a year ago or 2 years ago, we built those custodial salaries back into our operating budget, but continued to charge custodians to the grants to be able to build surplus in the interim before we lose this federal funding in a couple of years. So that was the first grant we got, and that's what it went to. And it was only $2 million, and that's kind of how it all played out. It was our very first. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And to explain the context for the question, I am both from just for my own, curiosity and edification, and based on what I've heard from community members, I'm looking for where did all the COVID money go? Like a spreadsheet that shows where all of the COVID money was spent, just to be able to speak to that intelligently. So that's why I was asking about the ESSERF 1 and how that fits, how ESSERF 1, ESSERF 2, and ESSERF 3 fits into the big bucket that is labeled COVID money.
And that's what we're trying to do today. So we're just bringing you up to speed on 2 and 3, because they're the ones that have, any remaining. ESSERF 1 was very straightforward, and, you just heard what we did with it. We also had an infusion of, was it called CARES? What was that called?
CRF.
CRF.
Yeah.
And that was, sort of very, very short window of time to use that money. And, we have a ton of documentation that we can provide as to how that money was spent. That was used for purchasing all of the computers that we needed when, when COVID hit, the N95 masks, all of those kinds of things, at the time, if you had been on the board, you would have seen detailed presentations about all of those materials that, all of those purchases, all of the costs and what it went to. So, when people ask the question, what was the money spent for? It was spent for all of those things and reported very publicly at the time that it was, being used. So, I don't know if it's helpful for us to do that in the present moment, because what we're really trying to, do is to give the board, an understanding of what remains so that we can make decisions about what to do with that money.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, my intent was not for us to spend a lot of time, rehashing. I was just explaining the context for my question.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Javier, can I just also share that there's a new link on the new website also that has all of the exact applications, as well as Javier's budget presentations that include those funds and the explanations.
So now we can legitimately say it's on the website. Thanks, Kate.
Are there any other questions on ESSERF 2, or should I move on to ESSERF 3?
Onward.
Okay. All right. So ESSERF 3 is a very different grant. And just a reminder, ESSERF 2 ends September 30th of 2023. So basically at the end of the summer, this coming summer. And this grant is the following year. So September 30th of 2024. So we have more time to spend this down, and these funds continue into next year. So we set this up kind of similarly to the prior slide. The only difference really is that I've separated salary and benefits out from non-salary, just because so much of this grant is actually staff positions. The grant categories are on the left. That's the grant application categories, and a lot of them have both a salary and benefits and a non-salary component. Some have just one or the other. And then you see, just like the last slide, the budget, what we've spent to date or through September 30th of this year, what's projected to be spent for the rest of this school year, and then the total of those two columns, and then what's left after that. So I'll just go through, I guess, hopefully fairly quickly, line by line, but stop me if you want me to stop, or we can talk at the end. So the first category, safe return to in-person instruction, I believe, is the total name of that category. And that's really the kind of catch-all for all the staff positions that we added that don't fall into any of the other categories that you see listed below. And just to point out, the staff positions that were added in 22 are somewhat different than the ones continuing in this fiscal year, which is why there's this more detailed note at the bottom that sort of differentiates what we spent last year, mostly in the expended column, and then what's projected is these different positions in the second note at the bottom. So in FY22, we had several teachers at Portland High School. We had some special ed staff, made some adjustments to specialist teachers. We had the garden ed techs. We had building aides, which we do not have in FY23. Those were only in FY22. Some stipends and some administrative positions. And as you can see in FY23, it's a bit different. We have several positions, I think 4 FTE for language supports. We still have a couple of special ed positions, a couple of breathe positions as well. We continue the special adjustments. The garden ed techs became garden teachers, 3 make it happen staff, and then we've got about $100,000 in stipends and some of those administrative positions as well. So there's a lot there in that line. So dedicated subs is actually part of the safe return to in-person instruction staffing grant category, but because it's so significant, I just kind of pulled it out. I wanted you guys to see how much that costs, because it's probably just a good thing for you guys to know. It's not insignificant at all. And that's about 35 to 40 dedicated subs. That was last year's cost. And then the projection is just to continue the program through this fiscal year. So summer there was basically a flat amount of $5 million total budgeted for summer in this budget. And so what you're seeing on this line is the salary costs only. So what we did for summer this past year, so summer of 2022, is we charged the salaries to ESSERF 2 and we charge non-salary costs to ESSERF 3. So that's why you're not seeing much expended really at all here for summer. That's because summer costs were able to be funded by ESSERF 2 for this past summer. The one salary that was charged here was actually the summer coordinator position that was added. So that's that expended line. And then the 800,000 projected is assuming that all costs in summer of 2023 are funded by ESSERF 3. So the projection would be about 800,000 to run summer in 2023 for salaries. And then down below, we can talk about it, but the non-salary costs are reflected down below. So there's a lot remaining, but this, of course, is continuing into the following year, so potentially could fund summer 2024 as well. But just to be clear, all I'm projecting for all of these things is just 1 year of cost this current school year and into the summer. Outdoor spaces is just some stipends there. It's self-explanatory. Vaccine bonus is self-explanatory. Nursing, I think this budget probably had a bit of placeholder costs. Ultimately, only a nurse and a portion of a health aide were allocated here. So there's some funds potentially uncommitted in that line. And then the social emotional learning line, many of you, if you were on the board at the time, would recall the June presentation of the mental health investment that had 5.5 FTEs, and those FTEs are down at the bottom of this, at the very bottom, that triple asterisk footnote. There were 5.5 FTEs in that proposal, and then about 500,000 in contractual services budgeted as well. And about 150,000 of the contractual services was kind of repurposed to add 3 middle school positions. So there's 8.5 FTEs there. And none of that was in play in FY22. That's all new for FY23, which is why you're seeing basically nothing expended. And the rest is projected for the rest of this year, recognizing that some of these positions are still unfilled. So, that's a very rough estimate. I also want to note, and it's noted in the footnote, is that there's a lot left over, not because we're not moving forward with plans, but because this particular budget, both in salary and non-salary, was actually budgeted in the grant application for 2 years, where everything else except summer was really 1 year. And we did that only because we had to allocate all of the 18 million in order to submit the application. We couldn't leave anything unallocated. So the decision was made to just kind of double up that budget so we could submit the application. So that's why you're seeing a lot left over there. And last but not least, grant management. That's basically Kate's position, and then a portion of partial year finance FTEs that were added as well. So I will take a breath and see if anybody has any questions on this section.
Member Bride.
Yeah.
So I'm just noticing the budget number for summer, both salary and benefits and non-salary, compared to the projected number, there's a huge difference. So I'm curious about whether that means that in summer 2023, we expect to not offer as robust a summer program, or is that to do with where the funding is coming from with respect to ESSERF?
I'm not sure if I'm 100% understanding your question. So if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. But the reason there's not basically anything expended in summer under salaries is because salary costs were ESSERF. Did I misunderstand your question?
You misunderstood my question. Yep. So, and I might be misunderstanding the numbers. So the salary and benefits line for summer, budget, 3 million. Yep. Expended 76. That's the coordinator. And then if I'm understanding correctly, the 800,000 in the projected column is for next year.
Correct. It would be for summer 2023. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to understand is why it's only 800,000 when last year it was 3 million.
So it wasn't 3 million last year.
Okay.
That's just kind of the budget placeholder that was put in when the application was submitted. Summer was funded half out of ESSERF 2 last year and fully the prior year out of ESSERF 2. The actual cost of summer year over year at this point is proving to be about 1.5 million. So we had to set aside in order to submit this application, and Kate, jump in if you want to. We had to have a reservation in this grant because it's different from ESSERF 2. It has its own unique ARP related requirements. There had to be $5 million set aside for learning recovery. And at the time of our
20% of the budget,
20%. Okay.
20% of the budget had to be set aside for learning recovery. And so that's how we went $2.5 million each summer as our, our way of getting there.
Okay.
But ultimately, there's a lot more.
Spent $2.5 million because it's cost less to run summer school the way that we've run summer school than what we budgeted. So that's why that is remaining and available for reallocation.
And then Sarah, just to provide additional context, we're doing our board focus at our meeting on Tuesday on summer school, and we'll get into this. So you're asking the very perfect question.
Hey, I have good timing. Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that, Miranda. Thank you.
And I'd also say that, I think we could probably broaden our, there's a lot of other things we're doing in this grant that could be learning recovery. So it's more just a presentation, potentially reallocation of the grant to ensure we meet that reservation requirement, the 20% that the superintendent noted. So that's something I think we're sort of internally talking about as well. So any other questions?
Chair Figdor.
Can you, the SEL supports that we passed last June? Can you remind me? I kind of think we passed those as 1-year positions, but maybe they're in here as 2-year.
No, you approve them as 1-year position. I think Miranda mentioned the fact that we basically doubled up that amount because we needed to put all of the remainder of the grant somewhere so that it could get approved. And so we put it in there, and it's basically a placeholder for reallocation. I will say that from our standpoint, that's an important conversation that we need to have because those investments are important investments that we potentially would like to see continue into future years. And so you did not allocate it as a 2-year thing. The reason that it shows up as that much money left in that category is because we basically needed a placeholder, and that was, sort of signaling a commitment to using our money for something that we know we need, which is the social emotional recovery of our students.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I'm very interested in trying to continue those positions as well. So thank
you. Anybody else with questions? Cindy.
All right, so moving into,
nope.
Got one.
Member Youssef, yep, got one.
Sorry for the last minute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. For the vaccine bonuses, we're not projecting anything on 2023.
We stopped giving vaccine bonuses after last year.
All right, thank you.
All right, so moving into non-salary, basically this first line, safe return, pretty much what that covers is contractual staffing services sort of across the district, a lot in central office, HR, and other areas in FY22. So the projection there is really just, I looked at what was spent and needed in 22 and kind of moved that forward because we're continuing most of that work. So that's a fairly rough estimate as well. We kind of talked through summer so that this is the non-salary portion of summer. So where I said it's about it's proven to be about 1.5 million a summer, about 800,000 of that was salaries and about 750,000 of that was non-salary. You're seeing 600,000 expended here in the expended column here, and that's because about 150,000 remains encumbered and still to be paid to a few of our partners from last summer and some open POs for supplies. So about 150 of that projected line is actually pertinent to last summer. So what you're seeing really here is 750,000 a year a summer in non-salary costs. So that projects yet another summer school. Summer 23 on this grant with funds left over. Outdoor learning, a lot of that has, a lot of the bigger costs, the tents were last year, and I'm not aware of any big costs in outdoor learning planned at the moment. So that's a small projection there. That's just open encumbrances. So there's potentially some funds available for reallocation there. So nursing contractual services, in the next line, I think there's probably, again, it was a bit of a placeholder at the time. There's probably going to be some funds left there for reallocation. Social emotional, as I mentioned, the mental health investment proposal from June had $500,000 of contractual services in there. 150 or so was repurposed to those 3 middle school positions. So you're seeing a projection of 350,000 or so being spent over the course of this year, with the balance remaining. Again, that balance showing high because when we submitted the application, we doubled up that budget. Grants management is more contractual services to do some of our grant accounting. Transportation is specifically the purchase of some vans, which is underway. Sanitization is basically custodial supplies, about 100,000 spent last year. So I'm assuming another 100 or so this year. Technology is supplies and services. There was 130,000 or so spent. A lot of educational software, some connectivity stuff like Google Enterprise and hotspots. Those types of things were spent. I think, again, this was also a bit of a placeholder budget. We don't have explicit plans or requests from IT to spend the balance. So at this point, we're considering this available for discussion in terms of reallocation as well. And then last but not least, the digitization project, which we expect to be spent in full. So yeah, there you have it. Any questions?
No. Member Bryden, you have a question?
Sure. Just in a sentence or two, and Miranda, this is probably not a question specifically for you, but I'm just so curious what the digitization project is.
I can answer that. We have a contract to move all of our financial, HR, and special education records from paper to digital. And this was conceived as part of our effort to move out of the physical central office and become virtual. That has since not panned out. So we will continue to have the central office building, but the scanning, and digitalization of records has proceeded, and it's one thing that we actually are completing.
It's exciting. Thank you for explaining.
Thanks for asking questions, Member Bride. Anybody else? Member Youssef, you're going to come in the last second? Okay, let's go.
Should I stop sharing for the next discussion, or?
If we're in, we've been through where we need to be on this update on the ESSER funding, and anything else the committee needs to discuss on this?
I guess just last sentence is about 350,000, for reallocation potentially in ESSERF 2 and 5.5 million or so in ESSERF 3, which I think leads us to the next section. Okay. Unless you have anything else, Javier.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. No. So the next item is, given that, we have that, that remaining amount for us to think and talk here about what to do with that. And I'll just, remind, board members that we've previously talked about the running a participatory budgeting project, and had an extensive presentation about that towards the end of last school year. So that is one of the possible considerations. As we mentioned earlier, we also have made some significant investments that are need to be thought about, whether those are things that we want to continue to fund in the general fund or support using, an additional year of ESSER funding. So some of the social emotional investments that we've made, additional special education and English language learner teachers that we've made, some of those will either, some of them will need to continue. We will need to build them into the budget. So for example, the finance department positions that this committee approved back in May will show up in our general fund budget. We're not intending to continue to fund them out of ESSERF, but there are things like the special education and ELL positions that we added, and definitely social work and, make it happen, and things along those lines that we've added this year will either have to show up in our budget or will disappear, or can be funded using ESSER for an additional year. And so that's the discussion that we wanted to have with you today, just to understand what you're thinking, the level of commitment to the participatory budgeting pilot, as well as the level of commitment to some of those investments.
And essentially, you're looking for like a temperature check,
one last thing that I want to sort of highlight before I move on, because Miranda touched on dedicated subs, and we don't have the analysis today, but the theory of action in doing that was we wanted to pilot what would it look like if we had, dedicated subs in building, something that building principals, have very much wanted to have. And, what would that save us in terms of, substitute costs, because the first couple of subs would always be covered by those dedicated subs. So I've asked Miranda to do an analysis of that. We're not ready to do that, but that's an area where, there's tremendous value added at the school level from having those positions. And without Miranda's analysis, I can tell you that we're not saving $1.7 million in substitute costs. It's probably more like $300,000 in substitute costs. So for us to be able to continue that, that's either a $1.4 million in the general fund budget, or it's, funded out of ESSERF for an additional year and then comes to the budget, or we just discontinue it.
So there's a lot on the table right now. So just to clarify, Superintendent, in part, you're looking for, whatever depth somebody has a comment is fine, but also you're just looking for some contours or temperatures of where people are on these various things. Is that correct?
Yeah, and particularly, I think, if we're going to do a participatory budgeting process in this year, we need to make a commitment to doing that in short order, bring it to the board for, approval, and then actually operationalize that. And I'm just cognizant of the fact that, we're now in November. And that's why I'm really grateful to Miranda and Kate for the work that they've done to be able to get us to the place where we have numbers that we can sort of grab onto and know that we're, in real numbers, not, sort of projections. But, for us to be able to convene, request and then operationalize, time will run short very quickly.
Okay. Member Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. So if we were to move forward with a participatory budget endeavor, would that or could that be essentially asking the community to assist in prioritization of known items? Like there's so much that needs to happen, and that, if we had unlimited funds, there's so many things that we would all love to do. I'm just curious about whether the community participation would be an opportunity for folks to come up with new ideas, or would it be a matter of saying, okay, from these 5 things that we know we need to do, what should we pay for first? Or is that up to us?
Well, it's ultimately up to us. For what it's worth, the previous discussion has been more of, I think it was the latter of what you described, of like putting some guardrails on what kind of items could be put through a participatory budgeting process, things that aren't salary based, whether it be, equipment or professional development or that sort of thing, and have a cap for how much money is to be worked through that process. And pilot it that way. It hadn't been discussed in the way that you were describing about allowing the community to prioritize all the things that are currently within our ESSERF funding. That said, that's part of the budget process of where we're always getting, we're having public hearings and we're getting feedback and all that sort of thing. So that's what I'll say about that right now. And I'll perhaps leave it there and look over to Chair Figdor. She might have additional comments on that, as well as her own questions or comments.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. First, it's a little hard for me to make, to have a clear sense of where we're really at with the remaining ESSER funds, because, while the balance looks to be like 5.5 million, we do have, I think we have an intention to continue into a second year, as you discussed, Mr. Superintendent, a whole host of the positions. So it would be helpful to to provide another, an additional layer that looks at what we think is remaining if we continue the commitment to the positions we've added, especially around SEL. So that's one comment. My second is, I'm very interested in doing participatory budgeting. I think we committed to the community that we would do it. At the same time, I'm worried about our capacity to do that, given all that we are managing right now. So I want to ensure that if we do take the next steps in launching a participatory budgeting process, that we actually have the resources to follow through with it.
Member Grant.
Hey, thanks. I think Emily just articulated sort of my view in a more articulate way than I was about to, but I guess I'm feeling the impulse to make sure we have bodies in the buildings. That's sort of my theme, is that whatever we can do to continue the staffing levels that we have, which in some buildings seems even inadequate right now. So that's more of my focus. I don't have the loyalty to the participatory budgeting idea. I think that predates my time on the board, but it's a fine idea in a vacuum. But to me, there's some greater imperatives here that I think the system needs. So, and Emily did articulate that very well right before me. Thanks.
Yeah. Member Yusuf, Bryden, any further comments on this? No. Yeah, this is the starting of eating something really big bite by bite, and foreshadows the budgeting process. There's a lot of nuance and complications here, but for my outgoing thoughts, I'm deeply dedicated to the social emotional learning work, and I've seen the impact of having building level subs, both on the ease of filling those first couple spots in a day, as well as seeing the ability to build consistent relationships with students to fill in where we have multiple paternity leaves or other sudden, long-term absences and such. And I know those relationships matter and help stabilize our students in times of instability. So I think they're important things to continue looking at and finding ways to fund, whether it's one more year on ESSERF or otherwise. Mm-hmm. So that's my perspective on it. And I agree with the participatory budgeting note about capacity has to be there. I don't hear anybody shouting at us, where's participatory budgeting? But it is a commitment we made, and I think it's right of us to continue to hold ourselves accountable, but it's not the loudest need in the district or the community right now is to pilot that, from my perspective.
So it might, my takeaway from this conversation, and I appreciate people's thoughts on it. I think there's a couple of things. One, I hear you on the participatory budgeting, and I think those are the right considerations. There's a commitment, but there's not, there's not a groundswell of people, sort of outside the office every day waiting for participatory budgeting to begin. But we did have a handful of people that when we put out solicitations through the appointments committee for the superintendent's search committee and participatory budgeting, we do have a handful of people that expressed interest, and there are others that would if we ask. But I worry about our staff capacity to do that. But if that's something that we wind up doing, we'll need to staff appropriately in order to be able to do that and dedicate the resources to it. So. But then I think the more sort of substantive, the other issue that came up is, sort of you needing to have a better understanding at a more fine level than what we provided today about what the different categories of staffing are that we are supporting with this grant funding. So like the level of detail that you have around the dedicated subs is pretty clear. It's like approximately 35, which is approximately 2 per school, you know, at the cost that you saw there, $1.7 million. But, you know, in those other categories are things that I know some of you have, you know, tremendous commitment to, like additional ESL teachers, garden teachers, make it happen staff and things along those lines. Additional social workers, things like that. And so getting a finer level of detail around that might be helpful in terms of then, and I think it would also be helpful for us to do that as staff to really get a handle on what are the things that we would prioritize seeing in the general fund budget if they weren't funded out of ESSERF. And that might be the next conversation for this committee, is to look at, what are the staff positions that are funded out of ESSERF, and then for us to come back and tell you, like, if not in ESSERF, we would probably want to have those added into our budget next year. And so if that makes sense, I wonder, Miranda and Kate, what your sense of our ability to do the cataloging of that in a more discrete level than we have today with, sort of garden teachers and, additional specials and things like that as just one big chunk of money. Can we detail that out?
Very easily. Yes. I have a list. I can provide it.
I love
Miranda for the win.
Yeah, I mean, the only nuance there is, some of the positions remain unfilled, right? So I would just have estimates on those. I bet I could label those as vacancies, so you'd have transparency there as well, and know exactly what's filled and what's not. So, yeah. So just let me know when you want that for, and we can get that for you.
Yeah.
Fresh air just came through the Zoom window of Miranda being back. And Kate, it's wonderful to have you too. I don't have all the experience to know what wonderful fresh air you bring into the room yet, other than tonight. Thank you.
All right, so that makes sense. I think we can, Miranda, we can talk, because I would like to put it through our internal cabinet process to review and prioritize too, and then bring it back to the board, at the December or, at January at the latest.
I just had one other issue, if I can, which is, I know Portland Empowered has engaged in training parents and family members and I believe students as well about engaging in participatory budgeting. I believe the city is planning, I'm not sure the city's process, but the city has had a process or is planning a process. But I do think that given that Portland Empowered, had an expectation that we were going to do some participatory budgeting, that if we decide that is in fact not something that we have the capacity to do. And, I would say, given that we're in a year of going into a year of a superintendent transition, and we just don't have a lot of bandwidth, that I feel again comfortable making that decision that we're not going to go forward with it. But I do think we should check with Portland Empowered to understand what their expectation is, and to ensure that we aren't abandoning something that they've made that they've committed to in terms of their families and students.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly, and of course we will do that. I also do think that Member Bryden, sort of suggested or brought up the idea of, did we mean by participatory budgeting having people weigh in on the what we are continuing or not. So I could see a scenario under which we could tap that resource to help us, look at those, prioritized staffing needs that we are bringing back and, helping the board to make decisions around that. Not quite the same as the participatory budgeting, but, to sort of give an avenue for input that would be sort of directed, as opposed to just holding a hearing, which is the way that we normally do it. So
it might be that might be a possibility. I do think that part of what Portland Power has been doing is training, training folks specifically in how to engage in participatory budgeting, and what we'd be talking about is not that. So, the participatory, the concept of participatory, and I cannot say that word 5 times fast or slow, is engaging in a process to come up with ideas and then evaluate different ideas. And so in any case, let's just make sure that we aren't undermining the work that of an important partner.
Yeah.
Miranda.
I just wanted to mention this, and I'm sure it's been discussed before, but I haven't been at every meeting, so I just want to make sure that it has. This grant, ESSERF 3, is a little different in its requirements as well versus some of the other ESSERF grants, and we are required to have what they're calling meaningful stakeholder consultation, which is a bit vague in terms of its definition. I'm sure a lot of the stuff we've done would already apply, but perhaps we can also do some due diligence, Kate and myself, to make sure that we really fully understand what that means, and that can help kind of inform this decision as well. Certainly participatory budgeting would qualify, but I'm certain there's other things that would be sufficient that doesn't have to be quite that involved. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay.
All right. Got what you need there?
Think so.
Okay.
That makes sense in terms of coming back in December, January with the sort of prioritization of the detailed staffing, and then the follow up with Portland Empowered as well.
I think you got it.
Okay. So we thought we would just spend a couple minutes updating you on where we are with the transition, to the COO structure, where we are with finance staffing, and then we also want to just talk briefly about payroll. Terry, do you want to talk a little bit about where we are with staffing? You've met Kate.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to start with, since we met last, I told you about Kate, so you got to meet her tonight. And then we hired a purchasing manager, Lisa Beck, who I think started last Monday or the Monday before. It's a bit of a blur for me at this point. But she's on board. And then Miranda and I spoke today about the grant accountant position, and we're hoping to interview for that next week. So we're in pretty good shape with staffing at this point, or getting to be there. And Javier, do you want me to keep going on some other things, or do you want to talk? Okay, so
no, go ahead and do yours, and then I think we can talk a little bit about payroll. So
okay, so we're continuing to work with Tyler Technologies with some of the issues with Munis. They've been very supportive. We had a gentleman last week who was on the phone with us for 4 hours helping with different areas. So that's been very positive. We have the upcoming audit. So Miranda and I checked in today about that. And I also one of the things we talked about at our preliminary audit meeting was kind of a list of items that the auditors would want to see. And I guess from what talking to Miranda and other people previously, the auditor would kind of, like when you're getting your documents ready to have your taxes done, like these are the things we need. So I need to follow up with them because we haven't received that yet. But as far as like the core pieces of the audit that they're going to request and want to see, we're in good shape for those items. And we received a letter of intent with an embedded proposal from ADP yesterday. And Javier's been through it. I've been through it on my phone, so I need to actually read it and look at it. And then he and I need to talk about next steps for that. And
yeah, just continuing on with payroll. I think, you know, we have struggled over the last couple of pay dates with, you know, a number of issues related to paying all of our staff in a timely and accurate manner. You know, the reasons range. Some of the system issues that Terry referred to with, you know, Munis setup and things along those lines, to people submitting, you know, failing to submit for payroll to do its work to you know, sort of affect payments. You know, underlying all of this is, you know, our payroll sort of key person is, you know, is on a leave. And so we've had to, you know, try to figure out how to replace that, you know, that level of understanding and knowledge without, you know, without the history associated with it. So we are, you know, working extremely hard to get that done, and, you know, picking off the, you know, the sort of those, you know, remedied as quickly as we can. Terry has done a tremendous job of organizing it and, you know, cataloging. We've learned a lot about the system problems that we have, and that really just has reaffirmed our need to outsource the function, because, you know, we can't have a function that we're relying on, you know, a system that is patched together and that relies on one person's sort of deep understanding and historical knowledge of it to be able to operate. So, you know, we are prioritizing getting the outsourcing of payroll done quickly.
Thanks. Member Bragg.
Thank you. I have two questions. My first question is, moving to ADP, does that replace all of what the team uses Munis for, or just part of what Munis is used for?
As far as okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, just you know, and Miranda, Terry, you can, you know, sort of, it replaces the payroll portion of Munis, and probably not entirely, because we still need that to provide the data for the weekly or for the biweekly payrolls.
The Tyler Technology conversations continue to be valuable.
Oh, definitely. I think that the way they structure it is they kind of, I don't know the word they use, but one item you can buy is payroll. And then there's these other add-ons, depending on how far you go with the add-ons impacts what you need and don't need. But, you know, we really need to tighten up the information that's flowing in to payroll. Because it's been one of those things where over the years, you know, people use certain forms, and we really need to tighten that up. We need to do that whether we go with ADP or not. So it's valuable work. But we really have to decide how many of these add-ons we're gonna, we think we need as part of the whole process.
That actually, sorry, that's a really great segue to my other question. Question or thing to point out, which I'm guessing and hoping is already sort of, in the mix for conversation. And where I'm going here is the issue of having like one person who does payroll or one person who does anything really important within the district. And, everybody's work is very important. But so I just wanted to call out not only the importance of making sure more than one person knows how to do everything, but also documentation. I know sometimes it's referred to as, what if somebody gets hit by a bus? I prefer to say, what if somebody wins the lottery? Because it's happier. But just to, I would ask that there's a collective review of who are the other people who could potentially get hit by a bus or win the lottery, and how can we make sure that everything that they do is written down so that somebody else can come in and at least be able to keep stuff going. That's all.
I reached out to a colleague in another state, and he's in HR, and I asked him, in an organization our size, how many people should be able to run payroll? And he said 4. And he said, you don't need 4 new people, but there should be cross-training in place so that if something happens, and, in the summer there were 2, and then that person left, and we got to 1. So
in the summer there were 3, and
summer there were
2
3.
people left. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And then just to reiterate, if everything's written down, then any of the 3 people will do the exact same things.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Chair Figdor.
I'm wondering about the timeline, if we are able to move forward with ADP, if that's the right, if they're the right company and we decide to move forward, what would be the timeline by what, the timeline in which we make the transition?
They, again, they gave us the process, and it's over so many weeks. And one of the things they explained that oftentimes the client is the one that holds up the transitioner process, because ADP saying, okay, we need this, this, and this. And the people that are running payroll are busy running payroll. So then you're adding on, okay, we also have to provide all this information to ADP so we can move through the process. So we've talked about beginning possibly in March, depending on how we go. So when it would go live would obviously depend on how we move through their continuum. But, my understanding is we don't pay them anything until it's ready to go live. And that's not the case with all payroll companies, but with them, it's like we do all the upfront work, we get it in place, and then when we're ready to go live, we pay them.
So you're saying second quarter of next year?
Yeah. And again, I don't know if it gets to the point where it's later in the spring, if we say, okay, let's start fresh in the fall, where we can train everybody, we can train the secretaries, we can train the directors and the principals, or if we want to try and move into it, in the early spring. So it really kind of depends on how long the process takes. And you guys frozen?
No, we're here.
I asked, Kim and Lorraine have had experience in other places going to ADP. And I asked one of the people at ADP, how many hours a week are you talking? And they said, 6 to 8 hours on top of running payroll. And they both thought that that was on the low end, and that it could be, higher than that. So we also need, we may be able to structure it so that we can bring in some temps that can help us gather what ADP needs to process forward. I mean, my hope is once we, enter into this, I really want to focus on pushing it forward as quickly as possible while being thorough and while making sure people have the training that they need so that it's successful.
Anything else, Chair Figdor?
No, thank you so much.
Okay. I have a couple questions. With the Tyler Tech pieces, has that meeting ever come to fruition? That was to be between the district and the city and Tyler Tech?
That one I still have not pulled off. I've tried, but I still have not nailed that down. And that's really nobody's fault. I think the payroll process for the last month has been really my main focus. And so some of those and keeping the ADP process going were really kind of where I've spent a ton of time, and I just haven't been able to bring everybody together yet. But it's still on my to-do list, and I'd like to do it. I think it's really important.
Okay. I did mention it's the mayor when I spoke with her. I believe it was last week, but like I said, nobody's fault. Just to flag, I was trying to drop a note while I was having a conversation. With ADP, first of all, are they paying us for all the free advertising until something happens? As the number of times we say their name on these calls. But seriously, what did you have any reaction to the cost? Like, I know you said you looked at it on your phone, but is there any sense of financial impact of?
I mean, I think really, I guess I'm most comfortable saying I'd like to sit and talk with Javier first and look through it, because as I said, they have these packages and it's not the easiest proposal to read, I don't think, because there's discounts. And so I really just need to sit with it. And it wasn't like, oh my God, it was kind of what I expected based on what they had indicated in our meetings. So I wasn't shocked by it, but I do want to kind of sit with him first and kind of look at it in depth before really, I don't want to mislead you on what they're asking or what it's going to cost.
Yeah, no, I heard where you are looking at it, so I wasn't expecting a full analysis there, but thank you.
Yeah.
Then I think the last thing, I just want to say I'm sorry, that anybody who has had their pay not correct or whatnot, like, I'm just sorry. That's not where it should be. I don't think that's where, I know nobody wants to be, and I'm sure, Terry, you and others have said sorry all along, but I just think it's important to say it from the board perspective too. I'll also say that timeline just feels like that gives me a lot of anxiety. It feels like we're already late in doing this. Back in when we first talked about the audit and talked about a schedule for, corrections. I was like, so the summer, like we're so, I'm just sorry, a couple different ways that this is where things are. Mm-hmm. And to you, I appreciate all that you're doing and others that I know have been doing to try to untangle all this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see more hands from the board have come up. I also see somebody as an attendee has put their hand up. Abby, we can let you speak just to let you know that if it's we don't have precise rules at in the moment in a committee meeting in terms of how public comment is taken, and we're gonna have to play it by ear a little bit, but also just say if it is an HR matter that dealing with it internally would be my hope. And if you needed additional support from a board member because you felt like something wasn't being addressed, that there's protocols for how the board would get engaged with such a thing. So I just want to be aware, give you the opportunity to speak, and also if it's something about payroll and that sort of thing, just need to go through protocol. So with that said, I'm going to figure out, I don't think I can do it, but Abby, somebody will give you permission to speak, and happy to hear what's on your mind.
I just wanted to ask what other payroll companies you had considered. That was my only question.
Great.
So they engaged a couple of other companies before I started, and I honestly cannot remember off the top of my head which companies they were. And a lot of them do not do public sector organizations, and ADP did, and ADP also does other public schools in Massachusetts, Connecticut. Hard pressed to find another district in Maine that outsources payroll. There may be some, but I reached out to several superintendents, several districts, and wasn't able to find anybody who currently outsources payroll.
No one in Maine outsources payroll?
Not that I found, no.
Okay.
They all do it internally.
All right.
Just noting that we're a much bigger district than any other school district in the state.
Yeah.
Thanks, Abby, for the question. Bilu.
Thank you, Adam. Sorry, I'm like zoomed out, so I've not really been paying attention, and I went on a 10-minute break because I just needed to pause. But I'm wondering if you can maybe tell me, and I think I might have missed it, like what you're doing to rectify what's happening now while you're looking for a search. Because I can definitely say I've been impacted by whatever's going on, and I would definitely like to know like what's being done now to help the folks that are dealing with payroll issues, if that's like, I guess, beyond like, you looking for a firm and then hoping that they like fix a problem.
We did talk about this, so Terry, if you're happy to
I can break it down a little further. One of the things we've done is we've broken up different aspects of the payroll process. So for instance, when employees, whether they're ed techs or teachers, they get paid for extra pay for things they do. I've absorbed all of that. So of this
just in-house right now.
Yeah. So everything's been in-house, but basically HR and finance has collaborated together to kind of divide up the responsibilities of payroll so that it's not all on Kim and Lorraine, who started in May, to run payroll while also gathering all this different information from different places. So it's kind of like a collaborative, all hands on deck approach with what we're doing. And also, I think it's important that, during the process of us, a new team running payroll, there have been pretty significant changes, like the teacher's contract was approved. So we had to make sure people's lanes were correct. And then they had to be paid, retro pay for that. The ed tech's contract has been approved. So we need to do that. So, you have like your typical let's run payroll. And then this, to make everything even more interesting, has been a year where contracts are settled, and that changes the payroll process. So we're trying to navigate all those things while being responsive to all our employees and getting it right.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And just another follow-up to that, is there how far can retro pay go without the need of without the responsibility of a contract? So if it's not based on the contract and people just didn't get paid, how do you is there a way to know that? Like if somebody just like was missed in the system or in the process, like how do you figure out how to like then repay them back or like then pin them? Sorry if I'm not making sense, but
well, you can do a detailed print history, and you can see, okay, this person didn't get this stipend that they were supposed to get.
But can I just add something real quick? So I think, to board member Bill, as far back as we need to, right? If somebody comes to us and says that they didn't get paid back in, September, or they tell us they didn't get paid back in, March of last year, we'll go back as far as we need to rectify those situations. But when we're talking about retro pay, what we're actually talking about is in the contracts that we just settled there. For example, the ed techs contract is retro to the beginning of not this school year, but the previous school year. So we now
I get that. I just used the word just to reference like the same understanding.
Corrections we can do as far back as necessary. So as people come to us and say like, my pay wasn't right the first week of September, or I didn't get my pay, last week, whatever it is that people bring to us, that's the stuff that we're dealing with right now.
Okay. So, but I guess a follow-up to that is, would they have to come to you? Is there a way you can know without them having to come to you? That was my initial question.
Yeah, we didn't purposely not pay somebody, so it would be incumbent on people coming to us to say that, something is wrong, unless there's a system, glitch that we catch and then that, changes. And that can go both ways. We oftentimes find that we've overpaid people and then have to work with them for a repayment of those wages.
Okay, thank you. Those are the questions I wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Member Bryden?
My question was actually really similar, but just to sort of reframe it or rephrase it around whether the onus is on employees to come forward and say there's a problem. Can there be, or are there plans to do any sort of review to sort of check and make sure that, that we know about all the issues and can rectify them proactively?
I mean, yes, we're like trying to get through it, and then
I know there's only so many hours in the day.
Get to a pause, and then, definitely we can do that. We need to do that. One of our challenges is with the accruals has been challenging because they were, again, I don't know, maybe it has to do with me arriving, but they were wiped out in the summer for some people. So we have to fix that. And then we have to go back to June of last year, see where they were and build that up. So that's something. Oh.
Okay. That sounds really unpleasant. And I'm sorry that you all are dealing with that. And I mean, just for context, the reason why I'm asking is, from a place of, rebuilding trust and, being able to get to a point where, yes, we are confident and we're moving forward, but I understand it's going to take a ton of effort and energy to get there.
And I mean, there are out that have thought or worried that their step and their retro was incorrect. And oftentimes it is correct. I mean, I've had people ask me, they were concerned that they didn't get their $5,000 raise. And I said, it's not $5,000 raise, it's 5%. And so, there's kind of some of that where people worry, and our contract's, fairly complicated with lane changes and steps. And so people see it and they do the math and it doesn't seem right. They reach out and we're like, well, actually it is correct. So
when you're already primed for like, there's problems,
right?
See problems.
But, most of them, most of the teacher contract moving forward has been everyone who's been concerned. The majority, their pay was correct.
Okay.
So
okay, Thank you.
I'll add one note that another nuance is the fact that like benefit costs change. So even if you're expecting a certain pay increase, but benefit costs also go up, that changes what you could expect.
Yeah.
And I know that's come up a few times. I want to close us out, even though I'm realizing that there's something wrong with me that I'm going to miss being in these meetings until 9:00 on a weeknight. But Terry, per Abby's question, could you clarify a little bit about the kind of due diligence and particularly following procurement policy, since we are talking about a sole source? It could appear we're talking about a sole source, even though that's not the process by which we appeared at ADP. I think that's important to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's better to do that at a future meeting, that's fine. But just
I can
say it should be spoken to at some point publicly.
I can speak to it now. I think, there is, I'm confident that there was additional outreach done early in the process. And, Terry is collecting all of that information, and I think we will have that for any, any review from anybody who wants to see it. But we are going to enter into this contract under the exigency provision in our procurement code, which allows me to make that decision. And so that's how we're going to do it. Everything that we've just talked about, we don't have time to do additional outreach and try to get additional bids and to do all the due diligence associated with all of that, given where we are. And so we are going to do it under the exigency clause in the procurement ordinance. So that's how it's going to actually happen. But I don't think that we just decided that we wanted to do ADP because we like those initials. The folks that were engaged in this early on did, with Kathy, did outreach to others and, quickly arrived at ADP was the company that had the capacity. And, so that's how we got there.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking to it. I know it's, it has integrity, but just want to get that out there.
Yeah.
I think we. Oh, sorry. Member Yusuf.
I also would say so easy to say ADP.
I think we have one item left to just an update up on the superintendent search, but is there anything else that we need to speak to here about finance staff at this point and payroll? No. Okay. Terry and everybody, thank you for all the incredible amount of work you're doing to try to get things right for folks, moving forward as well as moving backwards. And again, to everybody that's been affected, I'm very sorry. Superintendent, go ahead.
Sorry, could I just make one request for our next meeting, which is I know that I believe last spring when we restructured the finance department, we had a staffing chart, and I've gone back and looked for it and just haven't easily found it. And I think it would be helpful for me to see that. So I just can put all the pieces in. Is that what that is? Yes. That would be helpful.
I'll include it in my update this weekend.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Superintendent search.
Do you want me to do that? Okay, excellent. Please. So I think as everyone knows, the Superintendent Search Committee is a committee of 13 people, including 5 board members and 8 members of the public. We met last Thursday, a week ago Thursday, to review the 6 firms that we received proposals from as a result of our RFP that we sent out in September, looking for a firm to help us with the search. and the committee used a rubric to evaluate the proposals and decided to move forward with interviews with 3 of the firms. Those interviews are now scheduled over 2 evenings. So we're going to interview 2 firms on a week from Monday, so November 21st. And we're going to interview the 3rd firm on the evening of November 22nd. And then directly following that 3rd interview, the committee will we'll engage in a process to make a decision about what we want to recommend to the school board. My expectation is that we'll probably recommend moving forward with 1 firm with a kind of 2nd firm as a backup or an alternative for the board, who ultimately will make the decision. That recommendation will be on the board's agenda at our first business meeting in December. So that's December 6th. So the goal is for the board to then consider that recommendation and act on it, so we can get, finish all of the kind of legal and paperwork and start working with the search firm by at the start of next year. So any questions on that? Or we have several members of the search firm here, so search committee here. So if there's any additions or omissions that I made.
No, you detailed things well.
Okay.
Any questions from anyone? Okay. That's the agenda, right, Superintendent? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Motion to adjourn. All in favor?